Do like 5 minutes each. If God is to be mentioned in this discussion, one has to discuss the validity of the God hypothesis, and if that is actually a valued addition. And you made an interesting point. You said, okay, there has to be empirical evidence regarding this. But my argument, Jamie, would be that do you think that that is the main criteria of evidence, empiricism?
Sort of. I think this is sort of train tracking, because obviously evidence is incredibly important, but like having an elegant theory or a theory that is very well explaining things like these, you wouldn't really call them evidence, but you'd say that's philosophical framework to sort of give a ground into different ideas.
For example, evolution. Evolution is not something that we've observed, we put under a microscope, that we've measured as the typical evidence that many people would see today. I'm sure you'd agree that there have been archaeological discoveries over time. And then what we've done is we've used inference.
Sure. But remember, I came here because I remember speaking and I was given my case.
Yes.
And then I realised actually you have the same obligation as I. Like, I'm looking at the world, and so are you, and I can ask you, well, how do you explain the?
Of course you can.
Right. So then, while we discuss evolution, it seems like
that was the reason people enjoyed our discussion. I don't know if you saw it online. People like the fact that you're more than welcome to ask whatever you want. And you're more than welcome to kind of push at certain things, but as long as we both get something from that conversation, you're more than welcome to come back.
I'm trying to put it on you. I think you have an obligation, not an obligation, but your model has to account for the things that my model are trying to account to as well. So when you're asking me these questions about, we haven't empirically observed evolution, then you used evolution in your answer of how we observe.
Okay, let me carry on that train track then. So if I was to continue that level of thought, I would say that whether it's evolution, whether it's Big Bang, whether it's South America or Africa, once being a giant
Tectonic
continent, all of these things are kind of built up through inference primarily. And what I'm saying is that when somebody asks for evidence, I put forward and I postulate that inference also counts as evidence. Empiricism also counts as evidence. So does logic. So does philosophy. And if a person was to take all of those things, what you're doing is you are scaffolding. You're creating an argument. When some people, Jamie, come forward and they say, you know what, I just want empirical evidence. I'll take over now. I just want empirical evidence, and I say that look, the very model that you're putting forward, evolution, doesn't necessarily rely solely upon empirical evidence. It also relies on empiricism, also relies mathematically on, for example, how you're plotting the data and the conclusions that you're drawing, and even relies on siding with certain data sets, but also certain cultural norms as well. So when you kind of take all these things into consideration, I say that, look, when a person comes and says, I want empirical evidence, I just want to break that that assumption of science, that we don't necessarily rely like Big Bang. I'm sure you've come across people in the park. You agreed with Big Bang, isn't it? But many people in the park don't.
Silly billies, aren't they?
Well, I mean, they'll take their own data sets and they'll take their own analysis. But again, that's inference. I would say that the case for the Big Bang is very strong. The case for other than the Big Bang, I think it's scanty and it's lacking. But again, people are presenting their own evidence, and both of them are valid scientific theories.
But I think, and then I can just ask you, how, just to clear it up, maybe you've asked it, how do you explain or tell me, how did so many species come to be?
So we believe that just like we're dependent, species are dependent, they're dependent on something else, that's dependent on something else. You've got the ecosystems, you've got the elements that we see. I would postulate a rhetorical, or you can answer it if you want, a question which is, you can't have an infinite regress of dependent things, which is a philosophical approach which says that ultimately there has to be an end to that chain. And that end to that chain philosophically is called a necessary being. While somebody would say, empirically, how can we, evidence a necessary being? I would say that when it comes to metaphysical questions, science doesn't necessarily claim to answer those. That's why there then is a gap. For example, even moral questions.
But can I just...
Sure.
It sounds like you're saying
God of the gaps.
No. You're saying, look, this is the outcome of everything. But look, if I track it all back, it has to go to somewhere. And then that somewhere must propagate forward through the system. And you're basically just saying there's like a golden thread. And that golden thread is God. And therefore, I don't know how it's gone from God to now. But it's done it somehow. And isn't that amazing? Yeah,
So-
but that isn't quite as good as saying, I understand profound dynamics of the universe. I can write them down, codify them. I can explain how this came into being. I can try and track it with imperial evidence. Do you see, like, I think you're just doing a philosophical argument.
Okay, so just like I said, you got inference.
Yeah.
I gave the example of a philosophical argument.
Yeah.
I can give, for example, rational arguments as well. But what I'm saying is that regardless of how you see it, the question is that, for example, if I claim that there's a God,
Yeah.
the burden of proof is on me.
Yeah.
If you claim that there is no God, you're an atheist, you're
Yeah.
taking a hardcore stance, then the burden of proof is on you. So coming back to my burden of proof, I gave you the philosophical argument, which was the contingency argument,
Yeah.
that you can't have an infinite regress of dependent things, and which is one aspect of the argument. But then I would then use logic and rationality to then give characteristics to this necessary existence.
Yeah,
But then also to add in that if we then also claim that there is, a God,
Yeah.
but then there is a book as well,
Yeah.
there is a prophet.
yeah, but can I?
Yeah, go
Can I
ahead.
say something? It sounds like your argument is this. Let's say I go home and someone goes, "Oh, look, there's a dog here," and I go, "Oh, where did the dog come from?" And I want to know, like, "Oh, we bought it from the shop around the corner and we drove it home." Instead of giving me that answer, they say, "Well, everything is contingent on the prior situation. And therefore, if we go far enough back, there must be a base level necessary being." That's not the question I'm asking about how did that dog come to be in my house, is it? I want to know where it came from, as in around the corner from the shop, someone drove it in a car.
No,
there's different answers.
I get it, but what you're using a linguistic a double meaning here. For example,
Yeah.
where did the dog come from? You're not saying where was the dog, where has it existed from? You're asking in terms of our contemporary English language, you're saying like where was it bought from? But
Yeah.
you used something else. However, when it comes to human being,
Yeah.
we're not asking, where have we been bought from? We're asking a very simple question.
Yeah.
Where did we emerge from? There's a difference here. That's why there's a
Okay.
disanalogy.
Yeah,
So here, if we're talking about emergence of human beings
Yeah.
rather than placement of a dog, that's why I think it's a bit of a
Yeah, I
disanalogy.
agree. We're somewhat talking past each other. But
sure.
I just, why I like evolution very much.
Can I just attempt to answer your question? So,
What's the question?
So, or your point, which is that just like if a dog was at home and someone's asking how is it there, what you're saying is, why not give the simplest explanation, the most logical explanation? But I would argue that
The nuts and bolts of the situation.
yeah, but what I would argue is when you're saying that this is a simple explanation, that over millions and billions of years, unconscious, unguided, materialistic, mindless forces
Yeah.
have been coming together, probability upon probability upon probability,
Yeah.
and they have created human beings that have the capacity to dream, to think, to feel,
Yeah.
and this all happened because of a cosmic incident. How did that happen? That either happened by chance or by itself.
Yeah.
I would say that this actually seems like a more plausible answer, which indeed does require a body of evidence. But I'm saying, and I can evidence this, that my body of evidence is actually more convincing. Has it stopped?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. That it's more logical and more convincing than saying that, over millions and billions of years,
Yeah.
this has just happened by itself over time by forces that we are giving.
No way, I totally disagree. That's why I'm trying to reiterate.
Sure.
That theory that you just spoke about is so brilliant at explaining our existence here. Like, it's so elegant and powerful that it must speak to then larger questions of like, what are we doing here? Where did we originate from?
but when-
well, we do have
yeah.
the nuts and bolts of the mechanics. Like,
Which is that forces created everything.
yeah, but like it's way more detailed than that because like they understand how like the cell somewhat must have reasonable paths that it must have come to be, like creating a cell wall, another cell must have come in, not got digested, been part of it, a symbiotic relationship. They understand the structures of moving proteins around cells. They understand like RNA and DNA, the replication process. Like this is fundamental cell mechanics, yeah? That's profoundly
You're using very
interesting.
human terms, which is moving, placing, relationship.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying, and this is what